Hello, and welcome to the Mount Gretna School of Arts Summer Lecture Series hosted here in the Pennsylvania Chautauqua Hall of Philosophy. I'm Jay Noble, and we're always grateful to be a part of the Chautauqua's Summer Cultural Series here, where we present about 12 lectures each summer. And I want to thank Vincent Strout for his support of the lecture series. And put this one. A little bit about our summer program. We've had 13 seasons here, and the school was inspired by the Chautauqua tradition, which is something I knew about and benefited from as a student in the New York Chautauqua. And the way the school fits into the community here is pretty cool. It's very unique. The students living as neighbors and walking to class across town and doing the lecture series over here. The school attracts students from all over the country and internationally now to a 7-week kind of pressure cooker kind of situation that's very rare in higher education. It's with a kind of niche focus for students that are willing to spend a lot of time outside in nature and learning about the nature of their own seeing, and spend all day drawing and painting every day, talking about it over dinner. And it's pretty cool. I'm really proud of what it's become and grateful to this community, because I really can't picture it happening in my neighborhood, for example. I'd like to introduce Matthew Mann, who I don't usually invite. Everyone wonders, how do you know all these artists? And I really don't know them I'm fans, but I know Matt. I used to sleep on his couch in grad school when I couldn't afford an apartment or anything. So old friend going back to Washington, DC, who ended up staying in the DC area and keeping his art life going and starting a family. So it's really fun to have him here doing our seminar class, which is a theory and discussion class that meets once a week with the mostly returning students or students that I think will have an interest in that kind of setting. And because it meets once a week, he's virtual. So this is his special time to be here in person, give a lecture, and meet with that group and see what they've been doing in their studios one-on-one. Matthew Mann is a mixed media painter based in Washington, DC. He received his MFA in painting and drawing from American University, my alma mater as well. Matthew has been a guest lecturer at the Luce Center Foundation at Smithsonian Museum of American Art, Maryland Institute College of Art and Design, and a professorial lecturer in painting at both American University and the Corcoran School of the Arts and Design. Recent group exhibits include The Passage of Force Through Matter, current painting at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Arlington, Virginia, Interludes at the Krieger Museum in Washington, DC, and The Necessity of Tomorrows at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Recent solo exhibits include Fixer Upper at Trestle Gallery in Brooklyn, New York, and Mod Cons at Brick Red in New Orleans. He is currently an Arts and Humanities Fellow through the DC Commission on the Arts, and next summer will be an artist in residence at Interlude in Hudson, New York. Everybody welcome Matt.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Thanks, Jay, for having me. Thank you all for setting up and joining me this morning. It's really great to see you. Some of you I've only seen virtually. It's nice to meet everyone and see everyone in person. I think what we'll do today is just kind of walk through kind of some overarching concerns that I have as an artist, and then tick through some various bodies of work that I feel like correspond to those concerns. My central concern, I think, as an artist, has always been visual perception and the systems, cultural structures, visual structures, technology, books and plays and poems, all the cultural material around us. All of these things are important to my work and affects how perception is enacted, I think. And so as I've gone on as an artist, I've used various subjects that keep kind of expanding and building on themselves. Some subjects overtaking other subjects as I've gone on through time, which we'll take a look at. But overall, I think my paintings is kind of documenting the thrills and spills of visual perception. And I use my own sense of puzzlement, my own media diet, painting grammar, and art historical tropes as a language to interact with my own sense of wonder, curiosity, perplexity. But what that means in practice is a lot of research and a lot of homework into media studies, aesthetic theory, and also spending a good deal of time looking at how I look at things, observing the way that I look at things, noticing how images interact with my own kind of visual complex in my mind and my brain. That said, though, in the studio, it still always boils down to materiality, color, composition, especially. And I just kind of have faith that all of the research and thinking and feeling is embedded in the decision-making before I get to the painting. Which is kind of a lesson that I learned from my wife, actually. She was a triathlete. So something that she and her friends would say is just rely, rely on the training. So how did I even get here? How did this become my project? So a lot of you and some of you in the future, I had Stanley Lewis as a teacher in grad school. And so he spent a lot of time with us out in the landscape, looking at the problems that we were looking at and relating them specifically at that time, or at least this is just what I glommed onto, relating what was happening in the landscape to specific Sienese and Renaissance painting and figuring out what was happening out there in the real life was kind of being almost systematized into a painting by those specific painters. So this is Giotto. We'll get back to Giotto. He's a pretty important figure in this whole story. And so the lesson I took from that was that painting, image making techniques and systems like linear perspective and compositional tricks, luminosity and materiality were kind of pressed into service to describe a world. And not all of these structures, though, were visual. They were, of course, living in their time. They were observing their time. They were listening to sermons and speeches and music created at their time. So all of this stuff was adding up to these kind of perspectival systems and things that like Giotto and Duccio, these kinds of people were kind of just starting to formulate in their images. And that's the lesson I took from it, is like use systems at hand to describe what you're experiencing and seeing. So that's kind of the course of my whole life as an artist to this point. This idea of being in the world and observing it too. The philosopher Stephen Melville talks about this in relationship to Giotto and these frescoes of the Scrivini Chapel in particular, as being like case studies in being inside of a world but observing it, kind of how he puts the viewer in the space. The scale of them matters a great deal in these paintings. So that's what kind of kicked off that idea for me kind of early on, was as to look at how I'm looking. So I have to make a quick confession. I learned only about a year ago that I'm a data person. It's like I took a personality test at a conference, and that's the outcome. But this is actually a diagram from a show of paintings a decade ago. And so I made this diagram, had no idea that I was a data person. I'm not like a collaborative person, or I can't remember the other personalities, but data person, key point. So I go through my days, kind of cataloging my experiences. Everything I encounter, from like colorways and architecture and typography, cumulus cap clouds, like how do they stack up to like Claude Lorraine clouds or Poussin clouds, you know? So I'm like always relating nature to this other painting language all the time, kind of rifling through the Rolodex of references to like kind of cohere the world and make it make sense. But as a data person, it isn't to say that I'm not also inspired by the squishy kind of intermediate feelings and experiences and aesthetic kind of experiences that like inspire wonder in the world. That's kind of what kicks all of this process, all this data process off. So all of that is fine and good. Oh, wait, one more point about data. It kind of informs how I think about organizing paintings too. It's almost like I think of it like a taxonomy, but it's a really kind of interior taxonomy. It's just a way to get the paintings going, a way to organize the painting. So it's like a lot of references stacked on top of each other. And the idea is that a viewer comes into the experience of the work and kind of charts their own course through it, based on references sprinkled throughout the paintings. So like in recent work, the paintings will include a lot of dates and band names and place names. And then there are also all of the art historical references that, you know, so there are all these entry points for people to have to kind of chart a path through the paintings and then take something away with them, ideally. So yeah, that's the real goal of this in art making, I think, in general, is to create a surface to communicate with people in whatever medium you can. Okay. So in practice, what all that stuff I just said turns into something like this. This is a painting called Tongue Tied from 2023. And I'll talk about it in greater detail later. And something like this, which is a painting called There Goes the Neighborhood, from 2024. So as I mentioned a little bit ago, puzzlement is part of my like technique for building paintings. So there's a lot of sense, but there's also a good deal of nonsense that helps steer attention around, which is kind of an important consideration in this kind of media studies, attention economy, ecosystem kind of thing that I think spend a lot of time thinking about. So these like what the F moments going on are on purpose to introduce a little bit of noise into the signal. But that to me, and it goes back to this like ideas around Duccio and things like that, like installing these moments of perplexity, open a space for curiosity and wonder. That's how I think of it. Anyway, so like all the fussy, all the prima painting glazes, and then all the materiality stacked on top of that, it kind of fires up. It reflects my own kind of database brain. And I think this is a bit of a generalization, but I think we all kind of have database brain at this point. And so the paintings are an attempt to just kind of like appeal to that state of mind right off the bat. and then be a space to kind of dig into references and dig into color and material and all the things I mentioned before. So what ends up happening is, like I mentioned, my own media diet and interests in research populate the paintings, and I mix them together in kind of confusing and conflicted and unorthodox ways to entice deeper looking. And this conflict, in a really interesting way, brings me to utopia, this idea of utopia, which is something I've been thinking about within the last 4 or 5 years, like trying to wrap my head around what it is. In order to do that, I started with Thomas More. I started going back and reading it. And there's a map of Utopia. So for anyone who's not read it in a while, or maybe never, it's a fictionalized dialogue between Thomas More, a kind of fictionalized Thomas More, and a guy named Raphael Hithloday, whose name translates to basically Raphael nonsense, or like Raphael bullshitter. It means like, you know, not a truth sayer for sure. And utopia as a place means no place. It's not a thing that exists. So we already have these like contradictions built in to the idea. And then as the like perfect culture, perfect civic kind of construction is laid out in the book, there are even more contradictions and more kind of strangenesses that occur, like the value system. I remember particularly gold being not valuable to the people in Utopia. So all the people that visit Utopia deck out in their gold, they're like, that doesn't mean anything to us. So there's like this inversion of value, and there's all these other like juggling of subjects that's happening in this narrative. And yeah, so it's just this like place of disharmony is what I kind of landed on, instead of being like this conventionally held notion of a perfect geographically specific place. It's a site of like dislocation, of disruption. And that's actually borne out in other theory around utopia, which I only fairly recently glommed onto, where like Ernst Bloch and even more recently William Paris are writing about utopia as this site of dislocation, using the material at hand. So using the reality that everyone experiences as a way to imagine a better future. So that's the big idea there. Utopia, site of dislocation. And once I kind of landed on that idea, my painting suddenly made sense to me, or it made more sense to me. I was like, oh, that's why I have all this internal conflict, especially at the time with the pandemic when I was first starting to think about this stuff. And I started out like, oh, it's all just a failed concept. Why does everyone still like buy into this? Until I kind of shifted my perspective a little bit and realized it's more about process. So let's go back to Dugio. And beating viewers' expectations by inserting weird stuff into the pictures. That's my whole game. That's like my only trick. And I stole it from a guy who's been dead for 700 years or something. He's not going to come back and sue me, so that's okay. So let's look specifically at some moments in this painting. This is a really important one for me. It's from the Maesta altarpiece in Siena. If you ever get a chance or have had the chance, it's wonderful. So the lower half of this panel, which is what we're looking at now, it's Peter denying Jesus, I think. It's this incommensurate moment. Well, there's a lot of incommensurate moments happening here, but there's a figure sitting on the stool that's just completely toward. But the real thing here is this figure reaching from the foreground into the kind of middle space to a banister. And so for me, that like fires up the rest of the composition of the painting, and it keeps attention moving. But what it also does, like, is introduces this opening, like I said earlier, to entice wonder in what was happening in the painting. And then this is the upper part of the panel. And so, I mean, this space is super compressed, but there are like, how many heads are there in this picture? And there are like 8 sets of 8 feet or something. So like, that's definitely a what the F is going on here moment, but it's in service of like a larger purpose. So as a 21st century person encountering this, which I was and still am, it immediately made me think of like visual culture at large and like desktop space and phone screen space and how indeterminate but also specific it is. So it's like these opposed ideas kind of collided together at once, all happening in the 13 somethings. So I was really, that's kind of what set me on this trajectory. And also, and like considering all the other like tech visual innovations that have kind of come and gone in that time as well. That desktop spatiality is really kind of like you can follow from Duccio to like Matisse to like, you know, Braque and Cubist experiments and so on. All right. So that's where we are. That's kind of where we are today. Just kidding. We're going back to Giotto. So the first series of work, previous to this series of work, so this is about 2009. This isn't my painting, this is Giotto, of course. I was painting still lifes. And I mention that now because it comes back at the end. But I was using still life as a way to kind of digest painting language and make a painting out of, but also combining direct observation with it and like trying to create conversation between the two things as a way to describe what I was visually experiencing. So that was, I don't know, 7 or so years of work post grad school was that kind of thing. And then eventually I had a break, not a breakdown, but a break. And I had been doing these sketches in the margins of sketchbooks and back of receipts and napkins at the bar and stuff like that, of these cowboys in Renaissance setting. So I started making them for real, and that was a really big breakthrough for me. And this series in particular, so this was well, actually my first grant project ever. I got a small project grant to create a series of paintings based on 6 frescoes from the scenes of the life of Joachim, I think is the art historical title of it, from the Scribini Chapel. And they are to scale, so they're 6 by 6.5 feet or so. They're quite large. So here is the sacrifice at the altar. So the story is just quickly. It's an apocryphal story. It's not in the main books of the Bible, I think. Joachim and his wife, Anna, were childless. So Joachim was kind of like kicked out of the city, I want to say, and had to go make sacrifices and do all these things in order for them to be able to have a child. So that's what this is. This is his sacrifice. And then this is my sacrifice. This is Arson at Nacotchtank Falls, which is a pretty layered title. The studio I had at the time was looked out across the Anacostia River onto what was then the new National Stadium. And so this cowboy is like reaching across the river and setting the stadium on fire. And I should preface that by saying a lot of these cowboy paintings based on Renaissance paintings, the cowboys were kind of plunked in place of the saints, and they were left to kind of just go marauding around the landscape. The significance of the Nacotchtank Falls, I should also note, that is the Nacotchtank, DC is on Nacotchtank Piscataway land. So that's what I have to say. Here is Joaquin asleep, or Joaquin's a dream. I can't quite remember. I should check it. It's not very far. And then here's my cowboy kind of like lolling around in this very scenic doorway, drawing a sheep in the dirt. So that's a specific reference to, I think it was Duccio, it might have been Giotto. You know, I think all of these guys had an origin story like this where they were discovered by some master drawing sheep in the dirt in Vasari's Lives of the Artist or whatever. So that's why that's there. It's also reminiscent of the Minor Threat album cover as well. So it's got like all of these like DC subtexts and Renaissance subtexts and things like that. I was really proud of that arm of, you know, kind of corkscrewing out of the cloud. That was my real triumph in that one, I think. Joaquin among the shepherds, this is stages of his journey in the Giotto painting, and then this is the apprehension at Andace Gulch. So I had this kind of idea that this guy was on the run. And here he is being apprehended out in the landscape. And then this is the visitation. Okay, so and you know, his sacrifice worked. They're gonna have Mary. This is Mary's parents. These are Mary's parents. And then this is the escape. So he's been captured, but he's getting out of there. And, yeah, the floor of that painting was really where a lot of time went. And then they're reunited at the gate. Yay, everyone. And then here they are committing acts of murder and mayhem at the gate. So not a nice homecoming for our cowboy friend. So this series like was extending that painting procedure that I was talking about earlier, where I was like, here, piling these figures into these compositions that already existed, basically. I was making kind of adjustments to suit my need at the time. But the whole series overall was kind of interested in all of the visual aspects that I mentioned, but it was all also occurred at a time like at the very end of the Bush years. The myth of the cowboy felt really prominent culturally at that time, with kind of unilateral invasion of Iraq and so on. So that's what kind of inspired this series. It also, I started to think a lot about, okay, so there's myth, but I also started to think a lot about aesthetics corresponding to myth. And so I was reading a lot like Frederick Jameson and George Nelson and Sienna Guy as a way to think through kind of like archetype, as a way to think through tropes in painting. So here are a couple more examples. What's this one called? It's like the Challenge of Rochambeau or something. Based on Caravaggio's Calling of St. Matthew, kind of a snippet and a compressed composition based on that one, with a John Martin landscape in the background. Which is, I became fascinated with disaster paintings, like those landscapes with all the lightning bolts and volcanoes and tidal waves happening. So I put it in the painting. And then this one's called Lightning Attack, based on the Saint Benedict painting by an anonymous French 15th century painting. It's just at the National Gallery, I like the composition of it. I knew right away that I could make a painting of it. And then this is one of the last ones. This is called The Heist. But the reason why I bring it up now is because the landscape is starting to kind of like occupy more real estate in the paintings. And I was aware of that, of course, but then I decided to just, oh, forgot about that guy. This is the pickpocket landscape again, and sort of various permutations coming in. It's based on this Franz Snyder painting. Actually, this one little snippet of it where the kid on the very left edge is picking the guy's pocket. But to encounter this painting, it's kind of like, it's like that dissonant note in the Giotto paintings. It's kind of like, wait a minute. So I selected that moment to base the painting. That was at the Art Institute of Chicago. Okay, so I started getting interested, like as my paintings started to include more landscape, I started to realize in other old master paintings, in other paintings in general, how much more life there was in the landscapes, in the backgrounds of like this painting. It's a Dutch Saint Sebastian. Of course, I can't remember who painted it. And then, of course, Joshua Reynolds, a portrait painting. So the thing I was struck by was like how much force and life there is in the landscape and the depiction of it, and how much like furniture the figures are. And I was like, huh, that's really interesting. Like, kind of on a cultural level, he's like making these people that paid a lot of money to have their portrait painted look like chairs. But the landscape is like this really alive thing happening. And I don't know if Reynolds painted that. I don't know if the assistant painted that. We just don't know. But the point is, like, the landscape became really important. And, there's hardly a better example of landscape painting than Fragonard. I became really interested in like these froofy, Rococo, atmospheric landscapes. And so this is a painting so we're jumping ahead like by about 2 years. A painting called Fragonard for Fragonard. And so yeah, I started to really pile on trees. And it was also at this time that I stumbled across this idea. I was teaching a basic painting class, or a painting 1 and 2 kind of class. And so I was going to introduce landscape as a concept. And in so doing, just completely by accident, I stumbled across this idea of a topocosm, which is a coinage by a theologian named Theodore Gaster in like the 1950s. But he used it as a term to describe like the total complex that creates a landscape. So it's less a place than an accumulation of people and the things that they do and the weather and the place. And so that gave me, I took that as a real permission to kind of start including as much thinking as I could. And I still think a lot about this idea of topocosm today, but this body of work was called topocosm. So this one is called Persian Park. The last one was called Garden View, because I lived in a garden level apartment at that time. This one is called Persian Park. So I was just really playing around with these volumes of foliage and stuff, and then using these kind of snippets of Persian patterns in order to make kind of some architecture in the painting, but also to create the walkways. This one is called Intervention at Kobayashi Cliff. So here's a good example for students. This painting had reached this kind of point where I couldn't do anything more with it. It was like I had done the idea, but then it was still sucking. So I decided to make another painting in the part of the painting that wasn't working, and that became the painting. And then it corresponded to all these other ideas about the visual screen space and interrupted attention that happens online, and like sidebar advertising and things like that, pop-up ads. So that it enabled this kind of moment of clarity, I think, for me. And then architecture. I was thinking through ways to, thinking through what goes in landscape. And so at the time, there was a lot of gentrification happening right next to my studio building. I was actually losing my studio lease. All of this stuff was kind of stirring around. So that made me start to think about aesthetics in architecture. And how aesthetics in architecture kind of communicate civic priorities and things like that. So now we're at, I think, 2015 or something like that. Because what was happening was, like, I was noticing all of the same kind of building happening at that moment. It all looked quite the same. It was kind of blocky with all these rain screens, cladding and things like that. Gentrification gray, everything was gray for a while. But in these kind of, then there would be these moments where in the dog park next door, there would be a mural of like a James Brown concert flyer or something, or like at an outdoor outfitter, who I won't name right now, put up like minor threat posters in the shop, like as a way to valorize what was actually happening in that space, which is just consumerism. So I began to kind of like toss all these ideas around. The Sienna Guy aesthetic category kind of idea comes back here, and we land at a painting like this one. A lot of these paintings from this time had brutalist or, in this case, fascist architecture. So this is, the building is the Square Coliseum in Leywood, which was a kind of city complex just outside of Rome that Mussolini had commissioned as like an ideal city. So the utopianism kind of was even starting it at this time. This painting is Tweed Palazzo for that kind of idea. Fendi, the luxury fashion label, is headquartered in this building now. Fun fact. But so I was thinking about kind of incising these architectures in the way that I have been incising images into the other paintings, incising these images into the landscape, and as a way to kind of express all that thinking. Oh, I should mention, well, I can mention it from this slide too. So the idea of the Tweed, the series is called Tweed Brutalism. That the idea of Tweed comes right from Sienna Guy's idea of cuteness as this infantilizing intermediate aesthetic kind of category. And so combining it with like brutalism as a term was a really like, I don't know, interesting paradox for me. But brutalism, of course, is an architectural kind of like mode style that refers to the blocky gray buildings not to being violent, but the term. Anyway, that was my thinking. And then this is another painting from that series. This is Ghost Invasion 1. So this is, as I was living my studio, starting to think about how the stratified histories of a place, of a landscape. So that was the idea behind this painting, and the spire in the middle is a Borromini spire from San Ivo in Rome. So now the architecture is really kind of taking on this interesting place. This is Pamphili Hotbox. So this is one of the Pamphili country homes outside of Rome. And I liked the kind of Palladian proportions of the building in the landscape, of course. But also my studio neighbors smoked a lot of weed And so I was feeling like I was being hotboxed all the time. So that's kind of what's happening there. And then this one is Cluse Goose. So this is a building called the Franklin School in Washington, D.C. It was abandoned for 20 or more years, but completely, well, it was used as a shelter, I think, for a while and just completely abandoned. So it was like this hulking, abandoned kind of albatross on kind of in the downtown landscape of DC. And so I made a painting of it. And here the materiality really starts to change. You can't really tell in this image, but the paint is really troweled on, especially in the landscape pieces and in the like water parts that I was using like house painter brushes and buckets and palette knives and different things. And then these weird clouds kind of like hovering over it. It's me trying to play with that kind of unusual spatiality of desktop kind of space. And then this one's the Voice of America, which is literally what that building was. And an example of what was like this idea of stratified place, where it is built is important. It was built during the 1940s, I want to say during a period of urban revitalization, so a neighborhood was removed. And then this kind of like style of strict classical architecture was put on top of it. And so that's really what the thinking is behind this painting. And also trying to get materials to do something different. And a lot of Trompe l'oeil, those daubs of paint are painted. They're not too. Or are they? Sometimes they are. This one's called Ghost Eviction 2. And it's just a further exploration of the materiality that's starting to happen. The color, I should mention that the colors are starting to get really keyed up to address like online color space, but also to get at that like twee idea. So it's like this cuteness masking some degree of menace in the landscape and in the architecture. Basically, what the architecture does in a space where people live and work. So then, okay, we're shifting a little bit. So we went from cowboys, landscapes take over, and then architecture pops up in the landscape. And now we're kind of transitioning back indoors. So this is from the start of a series called Commodity Aesthetics, which is a term that I borrowed from a German theorist named Wolfgang Haug. I'll talk a little bit more in detail about in a couple slides, but so this is where that kind of like James Brown flyer minor threat kind of poster idea starts to come in as a way to valorize the kind of commodity culture that is rampant. So this is again borrowing from art historical sources. This is a Isamu Noguchi sculpture used as an umbrella stand in a space that's got this the minor threat poster, and that is real in the drawing. And the real triumph with this one, I will tell you, is cutting out the pieces of tape perfectly to pass behind the sculpture. I was really proud of that day. And then here's another one from that time, Modigliani Watch Choker, I think is what it's called. So now we're 2016, 17, I think. All charcoal collage and solvent transfer on paper. Yeah, and all the previous paintings were strictly oil painting. that's going to change fairly soon. After those drawings, so I just want to quickly say, I'd seen a show at the Drawing Center of Cecily Brown works on paper, and it blew my effing mind. I was like, paper works as actual art, but they kind of don't look finished, but it doesn't have to, it doesn't really matter. You can, this is all valid. Like, what's with your orthodoxy? Go away. So that's what I took from that show. And I went to my studio and I made those drawings. But then with this idea of commodity aesthetics and borrowing art works into this commodity idea, which I started to see online anyway, which I now realize was algorithmically kind of driven toward me. So I was seeing like Frank Stella design blankets and pillows and other things, mostly minimalism, which is interesting. So let's talk about it now. The Wolfgang Haug idea of commodity aesthetics, one of the main takeaways for me from that book was that he describes art, well, he describes poetry, but this is applicable to art, as being especially susceptible to being kind of co-opted because of its openness of interpretation, because of its, you know, its utility is ambiguous, its meanings are ambiguous, so then you can kind of like map other ambitions onto it, as many as you want. So that was an interesting kind of idea to me, and I started to think about that as I was making a painting like this. This is Statement Tub, and it's a Bridget Riley shower curtain in front of a tub. So I was using a lot of like Architectural Digest and interior design magazines and things like that as compositional frameworks. So instead of like seeing these painting, creating the kind of like architecture of the paintings, it's now like this kind of commercial photography, really. And then this one's called Threat Lemon. I was interested in the idea, in the way that food was used to stage houses in like in real life, but also in like interior design magazines and stuff. So and there I was just noticing a lot of vases and bowls of lemons in these spaces. So I wanted to make a painting about it. There's another painting from right around this time of there was in a Kinfolk magazine kind of article, there was a loaf of bread sitting on a chair. just in like a living space. I thought that was the funniest thing ever. I still do, obviously. Borrowing, I'll just unpack it. So the window light on the left side is of a Mondrian painting, kind of like broken down put into service as a window light. And then the floor, the zigzagging floor, is part of a Frank Stella painting. So that's really how the composition was made. And then I just kind of created these wall kind of forms out of that. The lemon crashing through the glass. So there's like this cartoonish moment of the lemon kind of silhouette in the glass. I was imagining somebody throwing a lemon through the glass into the space, like Wile E. Coyote or Bugs Bunny or something. So yeah, that's the menace in that. It's all like sweetness and light instead of gets a lemon crashing into your living room. This one's called Seafoam Pony Wall. Same idea. So, and this is where I was going to actually originally mention the Wolfgang Haug, the minimalism idea, but that's why minimalism is in so many of these paintings, is because it is so open to interpretation. It really is on the line between like function and artwork, and there are all these conversations happening around it. And so that's how they get installed in these spaces. This, I think, was from another Kinfolk magazine photograph, if that's even still around. I don't know. But so there's a solid wall drawing that's kind of in the background, and a Donald Judd sculpture that's kind of a table, and then so this is printmaking starts to kind of come in. Instead of doing solvent transfers and things like that, I started to just commit to making prints in the paintings as a way of drawing, basically. I mean, that's the space that it was kind of occupying. And then this one, now we're at 2019. This one's called Climate Control. And this one is very much related to Rem Koolhaas's essay, I'm looking at you, sprinkling of seminar people, junk space. And particularly the section right at the beginning about air conditioning. So the Nest thermostat, which was a big motif for me at this moment, they're both set heating and cooling at the same temperature, which is obviously just ridiculous. And a lot of the other same material that I'm dealing with. I had recently taken a trip to Los Angeles to see the case study house number 9, the Charles and Ray Ames house in the Pacific Palisades, which survived big fires from a year ago. And so that idea was really percolating in this painting. And then for this wacky cross pieces, I was using a Joel Shapiro sculpture. I thought that was really going to be a big motif for a while, but I kind of abandoned it. It was a little too wacky for me. But it does relate back to the earlier cowboy paintings. I was using Bob Fosse, like he was a choreographer for anyone who doesn't know. So like photographs of his dancers for the cowboy paintings. Those were the poses of the cowboys in a lot of the time. And then the Youth Brigade poster, DC band that I really like. But the space, the Rock Hotel, is an important location on Jane Street. It was a punk venue, now a hotel where people drink. And then this one's called Minor Optimist. Nest thermostat again. I was really interested in playing with the transparency in this painting, just to see really if I could manage it. But a lot of these still ideas are in play. However, this kind of creeping utopian kind of thinking is now starting to really come forward with the Candide, Voltaire's Candide, printed over the top of the punk flag, which is itself kind of like now starting to get a bit obscure. So the Candide story, Voltaire wrote it as like a takedown, a sarcastic takedown of optimism. And so, you know, throughout the story, Candide goes through like these horrible trials, and he's just like, well, this is the best of all possible worlds, I guess. You know, this is how it's supposed to be. And so that was Voltaire's take on optimism. I was using to kind of question is a Nest thermostat really a good idea? I mean, it's Google spyware, right? So do you really want that in your house? But also even in the punk reference, like there is this, you know, community building aspect to it. But it's also open for interpretation. I mean, there are lots of really atrociously motivated, racist Nazi skinhead punk bands out there making the same genre of music, but it's totally disgusting messaging. So yeah, that was a lot of the tension happening at this time. And now we're fully jumping back into landscape. So a big thing happened between this painting and this painting. One of them was COVID-19. So, and a month prior to that, my wife had a baby. I just sat there eating Jello, and was scared. But and then this painting happened. So COVID, obviously, we're all locked down. And then in the studio, I'm going outside. And I'm going outside and making a big painting. So these paintings are 6.5 feet by 5-ish feet or something. They're very large. And now the architecture, these like wall studs, which was a big motif kind of leading up to this, but I found myself fussing with them too much in the paintings, which is one of my criticisms of myself up to that point, was being too fussy. So I started using just gestures to block in these architectural forms and then glazing them to kind of look like wall studs. The flyers are starting to kind of like be difficult to read. I mean, identifiable in some ways, and I kind of select what is legible and what isn't. As a way to get at kind of my own confusion at the time of like what was happening in the world and my life, you know, a lot of stress and anxiety with a virus that at this moment nobody knew anything about, like how it transmitted and stuff. But also having a new baby. This one is called Ribcricks with apologies. I wanted to use the studs, these gestural studs, as something bodily. For some reason, I was feeling like I wanted to kind of make a painting that I felt like was as stressed physically as I was stressed in my life. And so this like rib cagey sort of structure, I've been tinkering with a little bit leading up to this painting, but here it is, fully formed with that very Fragonard-y, anti-gravity, kind of misty, atmospheric landscape in the background. And here there's like collage and, you know, printing an oil bar happening here. Again, just reflecting a lot of like conflict, a lot of tension. But the Plato thing, so the apologies, it was kind of a mission statement, almost as an artist. Plato's apology, it's him at trial, basically saying, sorry, not sorry, to the jurists. So like he's brought up on charges of like corrupting the youth of Athens or something he was teaching. And he's like, I gotta do my thing. So this one is State of Arcadia. And here just trying to tinker with the way the studs are working in the space. This is another example of a painting coming to like a crisis moment. This painting took like 3 years to finish. And I kept painting it up to the idea. And then if the idea wasn't good enough, so I had to go away for a while. And then I would have an idea for it, and I would paint it up to that idea. And that idea wasn't good enough, so I had to go back away for a while. And that was all kicked off because I had a studio visit, and I got that horrible question, is this done? I was like, no, I guess not. And he was right. It wasn't finished. But materially, what's happening here is a lot of screen printing, and I did kind of a no-no when I put like the acrylic paint over the oil paint. So we'll see what happens with that. But it was just a way to kind of like, in completing this painting and struggling with this painting, I was trying to think of ways to complete it. And so like deconstructing the colors and the foliage motif and stuff, and just breaking it down into like these masses of brush strokes in places where I needed something to be. And that became the solution for the painting. And then of course the interwoven print making that's happening, contending a lot with my own, again, confusion of the moment, but also like thinking a lot about how visual information is kind of like comes to us in these fits and overlapping and contradictory ways, and we have to kind of like do our best to parse through all of that, which is kind of the direction that the paintings are going, is thinking through that kind of state of mind. So the pun flyer is printed over a cleanup notice that is posted around the city. And it was used, this particular notice, the reason why I bring it up, it was used to kind of as a way to harass like homeless encampments under the bridges in the city. And so thinking about this idea of optimism, utopia, Acadia, idols and things like that, and then implanting that kind of thing was really, I don't know, a way for me to kind of address that questioning of what the goal actually is in that kind of civic interchange. And then this one's called Eclipse. So familiar forms, the materiality is changing. So I was doing a lot of experiments that I don't have any pictures of, like trying to figure out how to work with the paintings in a new way. So there are a lot of like weird installation almost concepts that were happening completely outside of leading up to this work. So I'd make a painting, but then I'd use other materials to try and kind of like make installation that led into the work or something. It wasn't working, but it kind of kicked off some good new thinking about materiality, which this painting is kind of a culmination of. For me, it's called Eclipse, like I mentioned. It's a painting rag into print of William Blake's America, kind of this epic poem that he wrote about the changing of empire. So at the time that he wrote it, America was becoming kind of this, had fairly recently gained its independence. He was musing about the changeover of empire. And at this moment that this was painted, I think was probably still the first Trump administration. So I was thinking about the end of empire. This one's Moonlight Sinews. This one very much relates to that physical discomfort that I was thinking about too. But this is also the result of some of those material experiments that I was making. Installation processes and stuff. And this is when I really start to like stick stuff onto the paintings. And it's really like fun to do. And it kind of deprogrammed some of my orthodoxies about painting surface and the unity of a surface and different things. Oops. So that was helping me, those processes were helping me break down some of those orthodoxies. And the moon in that last painting and the moon in this painting. So I do a lot of painting at night when no one else is around, which is great. But my son, who was then 2 years old at this point, became really fascinated with the moon. So started putting it in almost everything. And this one's called Night Bin. I really like that one. A lot of the usual stuff, except for the Aspen piece. So this is a good moment to talk about Aspen piece, which is a print that I'd had in my repertoire for quite a while. But obscuring the Utopia book title page is a snippet, a detail print of the cover of Aspen Feast, which is like the best band name ever. Album called How Do You Call the Cops on the Cops? They were a 1990s kind of like hardcore band in Seattle. But this was definitely like at the George Floyd moment, which in DC was like really explosive. But again, asking the question about utopia, is this right? Is this really right? And how do you call the cop on the cops? Okay, back to tongue tie. So what I was doing was I was making these, like the thing on the far left, I was making scraps. Like I was painting these non-objective paintings on pieces of cardboard for maybe using later in a painting, maybe not. Sometimes they find their way in, sometimes they don't, and then they get worked on some more. Really leaning hard on those Fragonard trees. And Plato's Apology again pops up, which is, like I said, is kind of my manifesto at that time. Still is, I think. And tongue tie. So the significance of the title is I, like a lot of people, struggle to talk about my work, and don't always like to. But also, there was this diagnosis of my son having a tongue tie. But it was like this rash of diagnoses of little kids having tongue ties at that moment. I don't know. It was a procedure that everyone was recommending. He's fine. He eats food. Not a problem. All right. So this one's called Pretzel Logic from 2024, I think. Anyway, so this is like really grappling with this. Is it failed? Is it like this point of just juncture, this utopian kind of concept? And really kind of like going for it with these collage materials. The significance of the title is it's a Steely Dan album, but it also describes my thought processes as just kind of like pretzel logic, as this kind of like dream logic almost. These associative kind of like points that touch, but only for some people, not others. They find other points. So that's kind of the idea. The shapes that are starting to happen. I was literally, there's this poet named C.A. Conrad. I don't know if anyone is familiar with their work. But their poems are these really eccentrically shaped, really concentrated poetic bursts, made out of like automatic writing that they do after doing a performance, or conducting some performative act, doing like these purge writings, and then like editing them down into these really, really beautiful forms. So I did my best to kind of steal one and make a shape out of it, because I wanted to kind of break a lot of the grid kind of stuff that was happening in the painting. And then this painting was going to be something else entirely. It was going to be an interior space. And then once I started painting it, I saw a lot more possibilities for it as an exterior space. And it happened really fast. This painting happened really fast and almost kind of out of my control, but I was willing to kind of ride with that. And I was really fascinated by this idea of landscape as Arcadia, again, this kind of utopian concept behind the landscape. So this memento mori kind of idea kind of crept in almost without me noticing. And then once it landed, I kind of started to go with it. So I started to, in an unusual way, draw on the painting, or find a way to like draw on it, which I wasn't ever doing before. I was doing these kind of like, I don't know, to me, prescribed procedures of making like piles of trees, which I love to do. I love dragon art and all of that. But it was becoming a little bit of a handcuff, I don't know, situation. Feeling a little bit trapped by that procedure. So this is really what the Utopia painting, the pretzel logic painting before, and this one is really kind of like breaking out and going for it, and including these scraps of canvas that everyone has laying around. And I started to like solve compositional problems by including them, and then including the text. So it's like, okay, the Latin as in Arcadia ego is, the Poussin painting. Probably a lot of you know, and so it's like in Arcadia, here I am. It's kind of a loose translation of it, but meaning like death is in the landscape. I'm always here. And so that little prismatic thing is saying also in Latin, there goes the neighborhood. So like death moved in, the rainbow thing is like, no thanks. But the thing that started to happen with these paintings and then some subsequent work is that I started to use large language models to translate into Latin. I did that as a way to have another surface for people to read into, kind of assuming that the phone is part of the process of observing. So if a person like me encounters some words that they don't know, I look them up. And that's kind of like a little bit, I'm still kind of working through this idea. But the idea, like I mentioned way at the top, is to like have people kind of come to a painting and then take an idea with them. And so if I can install something that then like they take away from the painting into their life, I feel like it's a success. And so this language is kind of one of my attempts to kind of get into somebody's life, get into their consciousness. There's another example. This dental impression, those are my teeth. It's saying I'm going to eat the forest. And so this painting happened. And then I was like, since it happened kind of like almost without my say so, I felt like I was like, okay, wait a minute, we gotta figure this out. So I did like tons and tons of works on paper. This is just last summer, I think. Using these large language models to translate kind of mundane statements or statements that I felt like had kind of like big impact. So like I'm gonna eat the forest. But we do in our lives, right? We drive cars and stuff like that. So we consume natural resources all the time. And then this one is called, I was sure everything would work out. And then we jump back into like a fully fledged painting. This is actually Italian. And I didn't have to translate this one with the Google. This one is another like kind of memento mori. I'll see you later. Death will see us all later. But yeah, I was really proud of this, the way this one worked out. The shadow underneath the skull. I was like, you did it today. You really got it. Here's another example of a really long-term kind of painting commitment. This painting was started in 2021, I think, and it wasn't finished until 2024. So after some of these canvassy collage moments started to enter the painting, that was the idea that was able to finally solve this painting. And then this is the last one that I finished it maybe a couple weeks ago. I think. This one's called The Last Drop. I had to really have a lot of discipline not to include words in it. So at the same time as those other landscape paintings, there are interior paintings happening as well. And these paintings are like, again, using the landscape, but this is where I became fascinated with like hand-painted boutique wallpaper that I was seeing in architecture magazines, and it was being funneled to me algorithmically as well. So it's like this paradox of like this exterior natural subject in this completely unnatural, reproduced in this completely unnatural way. And so I started overlaying that landscape material over, like imagining it, over interior architectures. This whole setup is kind of like this Palladian door to window relationship from an architecture magazine that I found. It was like a renovation of a barn. I can't remember the architect. This is called Manzanas y Piedras. It's Luis Barragan's staircase in his house. That's the subject matter. But again, finding ways to kind of like layer that natural, unnatural kind of subject matter and bend it in a space was really fascinating to me and kind of corresponded to what I've been kind of harping on all morning about the desktop space and how rendering technologies kind of operate in it and kind of bend images around. So Luis Barragan, just quickly, is a Mexican architect, really famous. And I had visited his house and he illegally snapped a little picture of his staircase. You guys, it says cantilevered out over the space. It's really something. I'm not sure I did it justice, but I do like the paint. And he does have shag carpet in the in the living room, which is maybe hard to see from where you are, but in the painting, it really works. This one's called Shuttered Enfilade. An enfilade is, for anyone who doesn't already know, it's like those concentric doorways that you see in lots of palaces and European capitals and things like that. So it was just a way to kind of set up a painting with these landscape elements kind of mapped over them. And I liked the abstraction that was happening in this painting as well, with the floor space kind of making this ziggurat, but also kind of like receding in space. And it's like, as you go down the hallway, the shutters nearest to us are closed, but the ones I was imagining were open on out to this very toxic looking landscape. Okay, so so all of that previous stuff was kind of like being fed to me. It took me a little while to realize it, but that material, the architecture, the wallpapers and things was really appearing on the sidebar advertising and in my Instagram feed and all of this stuff. So this is the first painting where I kind of just like, okay, algorithm, tell me stuff. And it did. I did make selections, but all of this stuff, I just wanted to figure out a way to kind of create a space in these interior spaces that was really about the commodity aesthetics idea again, but also the nonsense kind of algorithm conversation that happens if you just take it, if you just kind of like take it out of that context and put it in another one, it's kind of creates this weird nonsense situation that would make sense if you are a person with a kid who needs little shoes, or you need a personal cooling device or a votive candle or something. So that's what's starting to happen here. Everything in this painting is delivered via algorithm. I'm making selections on what to include. But yeah, at this stage, the information is just coming. I'm just kind of finding a way to put it in shelves, which is what happens with these paintings, which kind of is what returns us to what I was saying at the very beginning. I'm kind of making still life paintings again, which I never expected. So this one is Hunger Commerce. So I was thinking of them as Wunderkammers of stuff that's just delivered via this technology that I guess knows me, but you know, since now it doesn't so well. And it comes in waves. So this painting is like food stuff, which I think is really funny. Like it comes themed almost. So there's pizza and Negroni, luxury desserts and edibles on top of lemons again. All that staging is happening again. In this interior space with the kind of unnatural nature, in kind of like an IKEA, which I kind of borrowed from those wall stud ideas to kind of leave unfinished in my attempt to kind of continue to be less fussy. And then this one is progressives, I think is what I called it. It's glasses. The glasses I'm wearing right now. So obviously I was shopping for glasses and it served me all kinds of glasses. This setup, so I started to kind of get cute and I started to use actual artwork as shelving. So this one, I think I've included another one. This one is a Donald Judd sculpture that you can see in Marfa if you endeavor to make that trip. This one is called Pretty Vacant for the Sex Pistols song, and really no other reason. And the shelf setup is a Mondrian composition. So I found that to be really useful in like laying out shelves. And I was getting spammed constantly by tomatoes that were supposed to smell, candles that were supposed to smell like tomatoes. And okay, this is our last one. This is Bread Pile. And I saw this really hilarious looking kind of hollow loaf in the New York Times and wanted to make a painting of it. I've made like 3 paintings of it. This is just one. This is the first one, I think. But it also kind of looks like poop, which I thought was funny. Yeah, it was supposed to be a study for a bigger, more kind of finished painting, but it became the real painting. So yeah, that's it. That's what I got.
Thank you, Matt. I was thinking, for some reason, I was thinking about Morandi in a new way during your lecture. I'm like, why am I thinking about Morandi and the way he kind of hides metaphysical painting and cubism and pre-Renaissance ideas and in things that look like, that truly are gently, obediently observed bottles in a simple light space, and I think he was kind of having some of the same pleasures that I could hear on your voice. I don't know if that's true, Morandi, but
He was a big one for me.
yeah.
The earliest work you showed us was relying on your data, especially the architecture. And then at a certain point, you started using the gesture instead of like an existing building. And it seemed to be related to you expelling stress. So do you think that like you allowing emotion to come in and influence your hand?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's that, there's like I mentioned, that, so those gestures were always the underpainting anyway, and I would end up painting them out, but I never wanted to. I felt like I had to in order to like finish the painting in a weird way. And then for some reason, yeah, like I was just kind of opening up during that time and feeling stressed. But also there's this notion of like the gesture as a evidence of being, like as an existential move, like as evidence of being, like a lot of people, Deleuze and people like this talk about that. And Deleuze in the case of Bacon, and Lyotard in the case of Asger Jorn, like the gesture as the only real conduit in a painting for like a physical act, like that's as close as you can get to being. It's a move that reinforces existence. So that's also happening, but yeah, like you say, it was really refreshing. And those are all one move, like a big fat brush. You get one shot and you just do it. And so it almost became like this Zen thing. Like it's just, you know, and those are painted first. And then all the rest of it goes in around it. So there's a lot of creative tape and stuff like that.
And then to me, it seemed like the still lives still maintained your sensibility of collecting information and then synthesizing it, but it seemed almost more playful. So maybe having that breakthrough of like using like your sense, like the pressure put on you from all the confusing deluge of information, you can like make sense of it and then combine it with that information.
Yeah, that's really a good observation. So those paintings became a way to like, I don't know, de-stress from the other landscape and wall set paintings, because those are very like, those are kind of longer term commitments. They involve a lot more kind of thinking through. And the still lives, I wanted to just paint stuff. Like after those like landscape paintings, they're all happening at the same time, but as a way to kind of deprogram from those paintings, I just want to paint stuff. And it just occurred to me that I already have so much stuff coming at me all the time anyway. I don't even have to pick almost. I can just like, okay, there's like a votive candle. It can go here, and then it's, you know, next up is a pizza. It goes in there, and it's still in a weird way like a portrait. Yeah, I was born out of a desire also to just paint stuff.
Cool. It seems to reflect us, or like you, but all of us, we have to come to terms with all the information and just being showered on us every day and getting better and better at learning what is actually meaningful to me. What am I going to actually pay attention to or filter out?
Yeah, the paintings are kind of an attempt to, you know, do that for myself, but also create an organizational framework for other people to maybe think through that too.
That's all. Thank you.
I have a question. So some of your work has some seemingly political aspects, and both, you know, raising moral questions and maybe making statements. And I'm just wondering, for you, is this like a form of explicit activism? You're trying to make a statement, or is it more of like an internal kind of conversation and question?
I'd say the statements are used to create the context for the painting, and then the painting starts to take on its own life. So like these maybe political ideas are what jumpstart the relationships in the painting. The visual relationships, the subject matter, sometimes in the case of like the flyers or the cleanup notices or something like that. As a way to kind of create a visual conversation, but also create like a cultural conversation, a political conversation, if one is so inclined. Particularly like people in Washington, D.C. will have seen those exact, those exact signs around town and be able to kind of like understand where they saw them. So that's part of the like idea behind giving people something to take out with them in their lives, so that hopefully there's some kind of connection a week, a year, a day later in a viewer's life that relates back to the painting. And I feel like that would be a success.
Thank you so much for your talk. Your work is really inspiring and it intrigues me a lot. I have two questions. So I am personally a classics minor, so I love Latin and Greek.
You'll probably correct my translations.
Well, that's why I found it intriguing too, because it adds another layer of meaning, because you're talking about technology as well and using Google to kind of translate it as well. So there's this kind of like sense of mistranslation because of technology, So that was really fascinating to me. But I was wondering, I have read The Republic, but I've not read The Apologies, and you're also translating in Latin. So you have like clearly Latin and Greek influences, and I was wondering, why did you choose Latin to translate into?
Because of its place as a classic language, and because in the Puzzlement painting, that's the title it was given, like art historic. I don't know who gave it that title, but I think it's written on a ruin in this painting. Well, I may be thinking of a Versino painting or something, but that's why Latin started. And then I also wanted to move it out of English, move the text out of English to create a little bit more of a distance to the language. Because if it's too available, then you just go to the language. So this way it's still abstracted, but still language. You can still read it if you translate it. So that's kind of the idea. And it was under an assumption, like I said, that people are kind of like having art experiences with their phones as some kind of mediator in that experience. So that is a way to get the paintings to kind of talk to that of the experience.
Yeah, that was something that I really liked that about the work. The second question I had was about the use of photography and visual images in your work. And I was wondering if you could expand on that, because you're kind of layering in a kind of collage way when you paint. True.
And also in the attention economy in which we all live, there's just a flood of it. And so I don't entirely hate that. Yeah. Like I really love images. I mean, I think, it's such a difficult thing to organize visual experience. For me, in the world of flooded image, in the flood of images, and the paintings are a way for me to kind of like make sense of my world, of course. But I also kind of love them. Yeah. And I spend a lot of time in digital archives, like doing visual research and in Getty Images, and I spend a lot of time just absorbing all of this stuff. And I feel like that interaction, like I said, the observing myself observing kind of helps inform some of the compositional choices that I make as well.
Thank you so much.
Maybe you can help sage some things I've been thinking about myself. So you have your types like punk rock kind of ethos at least. And I guess you were talking about art being able to be co-opted by consumerism. And I guess I'm at the point in my life where I'm just like, how is fine art not just like enforcing cultural capital like, if our audience is the ruling class or people who are artists themselves,
Yeah.
by and large, right? Like, people that galleries generally are not, don't have access to what we do. And unlike punk rock or unlike other forms of art, street art or other even visual forms, like, how do we deal with that?
My view on it at this stage, having kind of been in the gallery system and been a part of been part of that full sausage making, and also been like being outside of it, it's a both and situation. But that's the tension in the work, like that I'm dealing with in the work all the time. Is how to live in that space. And the only way that I found that feels right to me is to do everything myself. So I, make the connections with, I cold call curators and collectors and things, literally to just kind of have a conversation, but sometimes that turns into other things. And that's a way of me kind of like controlling like the DIY ethos and like the hardcore community and stuff. Controlling the flow of the work and kind of controlling how it goes out into the world. Is that answering your question?
I think so. I sometimes in my darker moments think that like maybe fine art is only defined by class. Like when I think about street art and outsider art, and that's not just a baby out with bathwater, like obviously there's great things, but they don't seem to get to the majority of people. Like Giotto is something that I think, we only learn about when we were in college.
Yeah, the paintings are a lot about that. My educational kind of background and all of that stuff is very much like the choice of Fragonard, the choice of Enlightenment era painting and things like that kind of go into the paintings to kind of speak to some of this stuff. But I like that you bring up outsider art and stuff. I did a group show recently at a place called Art Enables, just last fall. And they are a gallery / studio program that works with people of various special needs. And it was, I don't know, I feel like engaging in that way might be one of the ways forward for me, like working in a real kind of community way also. So the work is amazing. Like they're real artists, but they're never really kind of lifted up in the like art economy ecosystem that we're kind of we kind of grow up in. They're kind of left out of it, but their work is so incredible and inspiring, I think. But I also have a quick theory. Can I bore you guys with this? That people like Duccio were actually naive painters. So like they were just grappling with their reality, trying to make a picture that kind of corresponded to what they were seeing. And so they had some systems to do that, but they were really just kind of like struggling and grappling and making a picture that other people would understand at their time and place. And so like I gave a talk actually at the Smithsonian American Art Museum about the relationship between like naive art or folk art or what painting and like Duccio. And there's a direct line. There's a painting called Acupuncture something by this guy named Uncle Jack Day. But it's almost exactly the composition of that panel, that Duccio panel that I showed, the lower half of it, with this like railing going off into space, and that was the figure in the Uncle Jack Day painting, like stabbing something. I can't remember the context of the subject matter of the painting, but there is this like one-to-one relationship to me between that kind of thinking, like Duccio thinking, and like Uncle Jack Day thinking, who looked at books, but was not like, didn't go through art school, like we did. So I don't know, it's all valid. It's all valid to me.
Hi, I just want to say how much I enjoyed your talk, and having spent an entire semester in college dissecting Plato's Apology in Ancient Greek.
All right.
I love that is your manifesto and the most famous line from the Apologies. The unexamined life is not worth living to man, which you exemplify in all your work. So, and one other quick observation, since you said you went through lots of images and databases. Are you familiar with the photo from 1960? Armand Gia, who it's called Girls in the Windows, and he has 43 fashion models standing in the windows of a condemned building in New York. They're all in colorful dresses. The next day, the building was demolished.
Wow, yeah.
And it reminded me so much of your painting that had the fascist building with the colors and then the tile, it almost looked like a tile floor from the Siena Cathedral. But it's an amazing reference, and this has been wonderful.
Oh, great.
Thank you so much.
Something I forgot to mention real quick, if I have a second, is like this idea of utopianism even undergirds like fascist architecture. You know, they thought they were creating like an ideal society and an ideal place, but with really horrible motivation, you know, but they still had this like utopian idea. So that was part of the tension. Anyway.
Thank you.